The M8 light armored car was a 6x6 armored car produced by the Ford Motor Company during World War II. It was used by the United States and British troops in Europe and the Far East until the end of the war. The vehicle was widely exported and as of 2006 still remains in service with some Third World countries. In British service, the M8 was known as the Greyhound. The British Army found it too lightly armoured, particularly the hull floor where anti-tank mines could easily penetrate. Nevertheless, it was produced in large numbers. The M8 Greyhound's excellent mobility made it a great supportive element in the advancing American and British armoured columns. Development history: in July 1941, the Ordnance Department initiated a development of a new fast tank destroyer to replace the M6 37mm gun motor carriage, which was essentially a 3/4-ton truck with a 37mm gun installed in the rear bed. The requirement was for a 6x four-wheeled vehicle armed with a 37-ohm gun, a coaxial machine gun mounted in a turret, and a machine gun in the front hull. Its glacis armor was supposed to withstand fire from a .50 in machine gun and side armor from a .30 in machine gun. Prototypes were submitted by Studebaker, Ford and Chrysler, all of them similar in design and appearance. In April 1942, the T-22 was selected despite complaints about deficiencies, due to the need for vehicles. By then, it was clear that the 37-ohm gun would not be effective against the front armor of German tanks. So, the new armored car, designated M8 Light Armored Car, took on the reconnaissance role instead. Contract issues and minor design improvements delayed serial production until March 1943. Production ended in June 1945. A total of 8,523 units were built, excluding the M20 armored utility car. The M8 was manufactured at the Ford Motor Company plant in St. Paul, Minnesota. In May 1942, having viewed the prototype, the British Tank Mission turned down the offer to acquire the M8 through Lend-Lease. It was named Greyhound in keeping with other U.S. armored cars already ordered by the British such as the T-18 Boarhound, the T-17 Deerhound, the T-17E1 Staghound and the M38 Wolfhound. Mission and operational performance. The Cavalry Recon Troop served as a division's or corps advance eyes and ears. This mission demanded speed and agility, not firepower and armor. When on the march, the cavalry's mission was to make contact with enemy forces at the earliest practicable moment and maintain it thereafter. In this role, the recon troops identified hostile units and reported their strength, composition, disposition and movement. During withdrawals, the cavalry often served as a screening force for the main units. The M8 performed this function with distinction. Each M8 armored car was equipped with a long-range radio set to assist in the exercise of command, or for the purpose of relaying information received from subordinate elements to higher headquarters. Another short-range radio set served to communicate within a cavalry reconnaissance platoon, reconnaissance team, or with headquarters. The M8 weighed 16,400 lb fully loaded with equipment and crew, and was capable of cruising 100 euro 200 mi cross-country or 200 euro 400 mi on highways without refueling. On normal roads, it was capable of a sustained speed of 55 mph, hence its nickname. Unfortunately, the M8 was not designed for offensive combat, and its firepower was adequate only against similar lightly armored enemy vehicles and infantry. The vehicle's armor provided a fair degree of protection against small arms fire but nothing more. Crews needed to survive by using speed and mobility to avoid hits instead of withstanding them. With a meager .12 in a floor armor, the M8 was particularly vulnerable to German mines. The vehicle's other drawback was limited mobility in heavily wooded areas and on broken terrain, and armored cavalry units preferred using the A1/4-ton reconnaissance car in these environments. A large turning radius, limited wheel travel, open differentials, and limited cross-country mobility made the M8 armored car susceptible to mobilization off-road and off-camber terrain or defiles. This limited operators to using the vehicle mostly on existing roads or paths, where it became vulnerable to ambush. The lack of continuous tracks and poor tread contact area-to-weight ratio also hampered its off-road performance in mud, snow or alpine terrain and, in soft terrain, the M8 frequently sank to its axles. Conversely, performance on hard surfaces was exceptional. As a wheeled vehicle, the M8 was generally more reliable than tracked vehicles of similar size, and required far less maintenance and logistics support. Description: the M8 was fitted with a 37 ohm M6 gun and a coaxially mounted .30 in Browning machine gun in an opening-topped, welded turret. A .50 in M2 Browning machine gun was sometimes carried on a ring or pintle mount for anti-aircraft use. This was not standard on early vehicles, but was a frequent unit modification. The crew of 4 was composed of the commander, gunner, driver, and radio operator. The driver and radio operator were seated in the forward section of the hull, while the commander and gunner rode in the turret, with the commander on the right. The vehicle carried 80 37-ohm rounds when fitted with a single radio. Vehicles with a second radio installed carried as few as 16 main gun rounds, although unit-level modifications could raise this as high as 40 or more. Machine gun ammunition consisted of 1,500 .30-inch rounds and 400 .50-inch rounds. In addition, it carried 16 hand grenades, 4 smoke pots, 6 landmines and M1 carbines for the crew. The armor ranged from .12 in on the hull floor, to .75 in on the front hull and turret. The M8 was powered by a Hercules Model JXD inline 6-cylinder 320 liner-cubed gasoline engine, giving it a top speed of 56 mph on road, 30 mph off-road. With a 59-gallon tank and an average fuel consumption of 7.50 mpg, it could manage an average range of 400 mi. Another detail about the engine is that it ran more quietly than other engines of comparable power, which helped the M8 maintain an element of surprise and reduced the chance of being heard by the enemy. Because of this, the M8 armored cars in Patton's Third Army were known as Patton's Ghosts, since they were almost never detected by the Germans until the very last moment. Service history: World War II, the M8 light armored car, the Greyhound, entered combat service with the Allies in 1943. It was purpose-designed to serve as the primary basic command and communication combat vehicle of the U.S. cavalry reconnaissance troops. The M8 first saw action in Italy in 1943 and was used by the U.S. Army both in Europe and in the Far East. In the latter theater, it was used mostly on Okinawa and the Philippines, and was occasionally employed in its original tank destroyer role, as most of the Japanese armor was vulnerable to its 37-ohm gun. Over 1,000 was supplied via Lend-Lease channels to U.S. allies. United Kingdom, Free France and Brazil. The vehicle was considered fast, sufficiently reliable and armored well enough for reconnaissance missions. However, cavalry units criticized its off-road performance, which was even worse than the M3A1 Scout car it replaced. In the mountainous terrain of Italy and in the deep mud and snow of North European winter, the M8 was more or less restricted to roads, which greatly reduced its value as a reconnaissance vehicle. It was also very vulnerable to landmines. An add-on armor kit was designed to provide an extra quarter-inch of belly armor to reduce landmine vulnerability. Some crews placed sandbags on the floor to make up for the thin belly armor. Another problem was that commanders often used their reconnaissance squadrons for fire support missions, for which the thinly armored M8 was ill-suited. When it encountered German armored reconnaissance units, the M8 could easily penetrate their armor with its 37-ohm gun. Conversely, its own thin armor was vulnerable to the 20-ohm autocannons that German scout cars were equipped with. During the Battle of St. Vith and the Battle of the Bulge, an M8 of Troop B, 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron was able to destroy a German Tiger I heavy tank. The M8 fired 3 37-ohm rounds through the relatively thin rear armor of the Tiger from only 25 feet, setting it on fire. The U.S. Army started to look for a replacement for the M8 as early as 1943. 2 prototypes, the Studebaker T-27 and Chevrolet T-28, were finished in summer 1944. Both were found superior to the M8, but it was decided that, At this stage of the war, there was no more need for a new armored car. Post-war. After the war, the M8 was used for occupation duty. It also saw combat in the Korean War, being retired by the U.S. Army shortly thereafter. In French use, the M8 was used during the Indochina War and Algerian War. Many vehicles formerly used by the U.S., Britain and France were exported to NATO allies and Third World countries. As of 2002, some still remained in service in Africa and South America. During the Vietnam War, the French organized Vietnamese armored regiments, each consisting of 3 companies equipped with a mixture of M3 half-tracks, M3 scout cars, M8 Greyhound armored cars and M8 self-propelled howitzers. During the Congo crisis, Indian peacekeepers with recoilless rifles destroyed at least one ex-Belgian Greyhound manned by Katanga's separatists. The armored cars were deployed on both sides during UN attempts to end Katanga's ill-fated secession. Several Greyhounds were deployed in Bogotá on March 8, 2007, as part of the security measures for U.S. President George W. Bush's visit. They are regularly used as checkpoint security by the Colombian military, and usually can be seen in the northern parts of the capital. List of operators. Past and present operators of the vehicle include variants: T-22 light armored car, prototype, T-22E1 light armored car, a 4x4 prototype, T-22E2 light armored car, prototype eventually standardized as M8. M8 light armored car, production variant. M8E1 light armored car, a variant with modified suspension. 2 vehicles were produced in 1943. The M20 armored utility car, also known as the M20 Scout car, was a Greyhound with the turret replaced with a low, armored open-topped superstructure and an anti-aircraft ring mount for a .50-inch M2 heavy machine gun. A bazooka was provided for the crew to compensate for its lack of anti-armor weaponry. The M20 was primarily used as a command vehicle and for forward reconnaissance, but many vehicles also served as armored personnel carriers and cargo carriers. It offered high speed and excellent mobility, along with a degree of protection against small arms fire and shrapnel. When employed in the command and control role, the M20 was fitted with additional radio equipment. Originally designated the M10 armored utility car, it was redesignated M20 to avoid confusion with the M10 Wolverine tank destroyer. 3,680 M20s were built by Ford during its 2 years in production. T-69 multiple gun motor carriage. In late 1943, an anti-aircraft variant of the M8 was tested. The vehicle was armed with 4.50-inch machine guns in a turret developed by Maxim Corporation. The anti-aircraft board felt that the vehicle was inferior to the M16 MGMC and the project was closed. M8 tow tank destroyer, M8 upgraded by U.S. company NAPCO. The main gun was replaced by an .50-inch machine gun and a BGM-71 tow launcher was installed above the turret. Upgraded vehicles were used by Columbia, M8 per meter 20 hours 90, a French upgrade for the M20 showcased by GIAT Industries in 1971, which mounted a 90mm low-velocity gun adopted from the Panhard AML family of reconnaissance vehicles. Sierra Brasileiro, a version developed in 1968 by the Brazilian Army Engineering Institute. The middle axle was removed and a new engine Mercedes-Benz OM321, installed to create the VBB1, of which one prototype was completed, the vehicle being found to be inferior. The VBB1 was, in turn, the basis for the CRR, which reverted to a 6x6 configuration and 8 vehicles were produced for evaluation. The E9 Cascavel was developed from the CRR. M8 Hellenic Army armored car. A number of M8 armored cars were upgraded with a steered diesel engine in place of the Hercules JXD gasoline engine. This required a rearwards extension of the engine compartment by 11.8 in, as well as some heightening. Also fitted were a new radio, indicator and new hooded lights, rear view mirrors, while the M2HB anti-aircraft machine gun was moved to the right front of the turret. where a new pintle socket was bolted on the partial roof and the coaxial 0.30-inch M1919A4 replaced by a 7.62x51 on NATO MG3 machine gun. Used for coastal defense and retired from service in the late 1990s. Colombian AM8. This is a Colombian fusion of turret-mounted World War II anti-air artillery in an M8 with a modern motor. It is a counterinsurgency weapon for use against guerrilla ambush in the Colombian mountains. Photo gallery. See also, List of U.S. military vehicles by model number, List of U.S. military vehicles by supply catalog designation, notes. NB. References, TM9 to 2800, TM9 to 743 Armored Car M8, 1943, Stephen J. Zalaga, Tony Bryan, M8 Greyhound Light Armored Car 1941-91, 2002 Osprey Publishing, ISBN 1-84176-468-X. External links, from WiVehicles.com, Roberts Armory, Photo gallery at Tangshaven, Armor penetration table of US 37mm guns, Sierra Brasileiro at wheels.net, FM2-6 Field Manual, World War II, U.S. Army.